What's up, guys? It's your boy Alex. I'm starting a series concerning topics in Black and White Draft and some educational guides. And in the first episode of that series, I want to talk about Volturn. Volturn has become one of the most popular playstyles right now in the metagame due to the fact that offense has been ruling the meta in a large way. And many people have been asking, how do you draft it? How do you play with it? And how do you beat it? Especially the beating part, because that has been giving people some struggles. So, in Volturn, the user aims to gain an advantage in a game by utilizing a combination of U-turn, baton pass, and volt switch mons. The term comes from really back in the day, back when Black and White was the current gen, and Scizor plus Rotom Wash was being really popular in Black and White OU. So we didn't really use, or they didn't use Baton Pass back then, or they did, but it wasn't like fully realized until later as a pivoting move. And instead, the name comes from the combination of Volt Switch, U-turn. That's easy. So, Volturn is a key component in all styles of offense and a nice addition to balance. Offense especially kind of has relied on it for the time being due to the fact that it stacks many setup sweepers, usually two, and thus it kind of struggles to get reliable wins otherwise, since it doesn't have that much of a defensive backbone to rely on in case things go wrong. So it is just about out momentuming the opponent so your setup sweepers and your breakers can do their job. And hyper offense and fats can make us use of it, but it's not mandatory. Hyper offense tends to draft a lot of these mons that can pivot, but they don't largely use it as much due to the fact that, for example, Azelf is a stealth rock lead mostly on these kinds of teams. Scizor is an sword dance mon in a lot of these kinds of teams. What else comes to mind? Those are the big two that came to mind right now. And Fats obviously aren't that keen on using pivoting as a key component due to the fact that they have such good defensive power and defensive structures to instead beat these offensive threats with their fat stats like HP, defense, whatever. Yeah. And as I stated before, it's an extremely popular and good playstyle in Black and White Draft. For example, in Smogon draft, Smogon Black and White Draft semis, we had 3 Volturn based teams, with the 4th one made by 64 Squares, having a dual pivoting core that it largely relies on to function. Yeah. Having pivots versus Volturn. So the difference between pivoting in a draft and a Volturn core is that it operates in a different kind of way. And Volturn explicitly aims to use offensive momentum grabbed by cycling Pokemon into advantageous game positions. Unlike this, how it was back in OU, for example, the pivot chains are longer in the regard that it can take more turns to use the pivoting move in cycles. So it isn't that uncommon, for example, that a Scizor pivots into a Rotom Wash, and the Rotom stays in for like 2 turns, clicking Will-O-Wisp and clicking Hydro Pump, and then only after that, Volt switching out into a Scizor. So the chains aren't that fast-paced at times, but they still can be like Volt switch into U-turn, Volt switch into U-turn, that kind of deal. So it really depends on the case pretty heavily. Standard drafts which just have pivots don't usually rely as much on this aspect, but they use it as a potential tool that they can utilize. And a good indication of a Voltron core is that the synergies between the pivots. For example, Scizor and Rotom Wash, a core that I have been talking a lot about, make great partners together, as Rotom Wash gives entry to grass types, something Scizor is able to take care of. On the other end, fire and flying types, Scizor gives entry for easy food for Rotom Wash. Yeah. So, then we have the last, like the theory-based thing, is that there are two different styles, full Voltron and full Voltron. And this means that it can be a component of a draft, or it can be the entire draft. So, most offense drafts can fall under the full Voltron structure, as their intended game plan fully focuses on these moves. Balance and hyper offense intend to gain momentum with pivoting, but they don't fully rely on it. So that's an example of partial Voltron. And I can pretty much guarantee that every single good offense team in this metagame has at least partial Voltron in it. So it has at least like 3 pivots inside of it, due to the facts I mentioned earlier. And funnily enough, having a ton of pivots doesn't necessarily mean that it's a full Voltron core, as I'm gonna show later. But it means that it is still looking to like utilize the pivoting moves really heavily. And you can change the way you play depending case by case. So one time you can like play really slowly and not using your pivoting that much, but it still counts as a Voltron team. And sometimes you can take like a pretty heavily balanced team with like 2 pivots and play it really aggressively, but it still doesn't count as a full Voltron team, due to the lack that there just isn't enough to go off from. Yeah, so now time for examples. The first example here is my own draft from the Smogon Black and White draft. And the idea was that I would have gained momentum with synergistic pivots with Landers, Raikou, and Celebi. And not extreme, it wasn't that extremely heavy on the Voltron aspect itself. Landers was used as an additional, like a Voltron abuser here, or a beneficiary. So it gained a lot from just having these pivots get it in, and it allowing to click it strong Earthquake under sand. And that's why I would have called it a partial Voltron team. The entire team wasn't focused on those 3, but it heavily relied on it. And the replay I picked, well, wasn't that great of an example, but I still want to go over it. So this was my game against Zebstrike them down, and I'm not gonna go through like entirely through with the analysis. But for example here, right on first turn, U-turn is clicked, gaining momentum for my Excadrill, bottom. Then right back into Escavalier, blah blah blah. Then U-turn again. Oops, wrong direction. Yeah, that's caned, and the pivot chain starts right here, where I gain an advantage position by U-turning. Then I sack my Tyranitar or whatever. Then again, yeah, that's done. U-turn, then right again, back to Tyranitar, whatever. So U-turn again. So this wasn't that great of an example, but it was just like a showcase of the idea in the team, where I used to utilize these U-turning clicking mons pretty heavily to gain momentum for my Excadrill and my Landorus as the main two offensive key pieces. So again, that's a good example of an defensive minded Volturn team. Right. So the next was this is Alice's Volturn team in Smogon draft, a Smogon black and white draft. And this is a great example of a full Volturn team, and I'm gonna show it how she played this against a really strong opponent. But it has extremely heavy synergistic pivoting cores in Rotom Wash, Scizor, and Azelf. And all three is kind of bait out different things. Azelf beats baits in darks with Scizor beats, and obviously it is baiting in a ton of these like special walls that Scizor is able to take care of. And then obviously these two I mentioned before, the synergy is pretty obvious. There are a synergy between Rotom Wash and Azelf itself isn't that obvious on first sight, but it's the main idea here is that Rotom Wash beats or comes in pretty safely on a ton of fat mons, like for example Gliscor, which Azelf, well, it can kill it, especially on the defensive offensive side. It doesn't always want to run like hidden power ice. So that's one great example of like a free mons building this large ball that it looks to aim to use. And here is a great example of it, where in her quarterfinal games, Alice played against one of the 4 moderators, Odin, and played a great game. And this really showcases how the idea of Volturn works, and it shows it right about here. So here is where the chain starts. No, it wasn't, my bad. There is a similar situation. Here is where the chain starts. So first U-turn is collect, goes back to Rotom, takes the flamethrower, then Odin misplays Clinging Roost, allowing again just a Volt Switch right back to Scizor, and a U-turn is clicked. Yeah, beautiful, absolutely stunning. And then right into Donphan, gaining a huge amount of momentum. And this is how her team really plays in, or the way it really plays, due to the fact that these three have such strong synergy. So I'm just gonna again just look at this, absolutely stunning. Locks in U-turn right into Azelf, right into a U-turn. And this is the thing that full Volturn aims to do. This is I think it was Choice Scarfed. Yeah, it's Choice Scarfed. So Choice Scarfed Scizor really banging home these threats with a combination of Azelf and Rotom Wash. And even though like these two are quite enough for this team to function even as a Volturn team, even though Rotom is really low, it has done its job very well. So in the end, Alice is gonna claim this one due to just being able to spam U-turn pretty fairly with her mons, and gaining a huge amount of momentum off that, and using her Terrakion to really break holes after a while. Yep. Then a Volturn offense team, again, Terrakion based. You're gonna see a pattern by Bluey, and it used a continuous pressure caused by Uxie, Scizor, and Flygon to allow entry for the Terrakion and the Kyurem. This was borderline hyper offense, but it's a great example of full Volturn. In the game that I'm gonna show, Axolotl doesn't have U-turn as a spoiler, but it very much contributes to the U-turning factor here. with bringing up spikes as a fast U-turn mon. So that's a thing that can be a key component in these kinds of draws. But here I didn't want to mention it because it doesn't play in that way in this replay that I'm going to show you. So again, I'm not gonna, again, here you can just fully see right away, right from the start, just absolutely beautiful focus sash right into a Yuxi, being forced out, then right back into a U-turn by the Yuxi, not allowing the pursuit to go off from, and again, then here U-turn again, and right back to Yuxi. And then Will-O-Wisp Messiah, whatever. And Thunder Wave. And then into a U-turn. And again, and again, and again, and again. And that's what these teams kind of aim to do. So again, yeah, burned, whatever. U-turn. Yeah, it takes some chip. Excelgor, it's not gonna do anything here. Click some spikes or whatever. That isn't what we're really after this game. But yeah, again, U-turn. Dragon Tail, we don't care. Yeah, and just look. It's gonna, I think. Yeah, it's gonna U-turn again. Gets a lucky crit. But you get the idea in this team. And Flygon is a great mon for these kinds of teams due to having a very good speed tier 4 as choice scarf user of 100 and still having a really good offensive typing in Dragon plus round. So it's like a Garchomp that is far weaker obviously, but still has these utility options in U-turn and Levitate for its ability, so it has a very valuable type resist profile due to the traits it has. And then finally we have the final team that I wanted to showcase, and this is trying to like showcase that not all hard U-turning teams are considered Volturn, but I'm still gonna call it a Volturn team. So here you have Jirachi, Rotom Wash, Hydreigon, Gliscor, and Yuxi. So you have 5 great pivots for this team. And it's a really fat one. So I would, this is like borderline fat, but I didn't want to call it that. So I call it balanced. So it showcases that a Volturn aspect of the core looks to use a strong defensive core alongside with a strong breaker like Hydreigon to outplay opponents. And due to the slowness of the core, it plays like a partial Volturn team. However, the team can also not be considered a Volturn-based team, rather a balanced draft with pivoting aspects. And this game is gonna show that to you. Again, even though, like, right away, you could easily click U-turn here, but you hard switch instead. And what is going to happen is that the Gliscor is going to U-turn. And obviously Rotom is going to grab some momentum, going to Volturn. Yeah, going to Volturn. Yeah. Lucky crit there. But this game kind of showcases that even though you have a ton of these U-turn mons, it doesn't always need to be played in the Volturn aspect, but it's rather an element of the team that causes a threat. Yeah, that's the key idea I'm going for here. And this game goes on for a while, but not many U-turn or Volt switches are clicked. Just rarely, every so often, a pivoting move is clicked. But I wanted to show you this core due to the fact that it is a Volturn team that doesn't need to play like a Volturn team. Yeah, Synergy examples include, yeah, I've talked like a million times about this already. Scizor plus Rotom Wash. Then another core is Hydreigon plus Landorus and to the fact that Hydreigon really benefits from Landorus opening up holes on steel types for it. And then Hydreigon again can beat ghost types and physically defensive mons. And it can beat Skarmory pretty easily, it beats Rain pretty easily. Like it beats these matchups that Landorus doesn't really like playing for it. So they form a nice unit offensive synergy, and both of them happen to be U-turn mons and really good at root ones at that. So they form like a good U-turn based synergy. Then Victini plus Thunderous Fury should be pretty obvious. Victini clicks strong physical weak rates into many mons, like for example Excadrill really easily. It clicks that into like Celebi. It clicks that into Thunder Rotom. It just clicks a strong physical fire stab into many of these targets that Thunders doesn't really want to play around. So, and Thunders instead beats off Bulky Waters, the hardest counter to Victini. And thus the core is like really solid. Maybe the issue is that they're both Stealth Rock weeks, but for example, Mizum made that work. So you just have to plan around it. And Zapdos plus Celebi is the last core I wanted to showcase, in that they are a very good defensive core because they kind of switch into many of the same attacks, where Zapdos doesn't really want to be hit hard by like a strong water type attack, even though it can like take it, and it doesn't particularly enjoy dealing with ground types, and Celebi really likes dealing with the ground types. Especially it can beat Excadrill pretty easily outside of sand, and even in sand it can beat it pretty easily. So it forms like this really nice defensive core that has offensive elements. So the TLDR for it is that mons that can beat each other's checks in a game. Yeah. How do you beat Volturn? Well, you beat it by hazards, obviously, because you cannot pivot forever if you are taking Stealth Rock damage all the time, and especially considering like Life Orb in addition. For example, Scizor or Infernape, you're just not going to really like that situation. Rocky Helmet punishes U-turn harder than anything else, and strong fast mons to force choice scarves on U-turn mons. Since you tend to lack a lot of power if you always are locked into a Jolly or a Timid choice scarf mon to be outrun like an Alakazam or a Dugtrio or a Crobat or Helcherakion, for example. So you really don't always want to do that, so that your offense mon does a lot of damage. Just a head calc that I had was that Infernape does barely anything into a Rotom Wash, and Rotom Wash has Pain Split, so it can just heal up close to full after. And finally, we have Set Sweepers, and this is a double-edged sword in the way that, yeah, Volturn can pretty easily force setup mons to play in a really awkward way, but if setup mon gets going, a ton of these pivots don't really have a defensive backbone to really beat them in a later game. So you can abuse the fact that they're taking like hazard chips or rock chip, for example, and thus gain momentum for your Salamence over a game. And yeah. So, in conclusion, Volturn is a key component for many offensive-minded drafts. There are two main forms for it, partial and full, and it has fairly easy counterplay. However, Volturn players are able to play around it, so to return to this, you can use Volt Switch instead of U-turn. You can use Pursuit to trap a lot of these fast mons. You can just alt momentum set up sweepers if you play well, and you can just click hazard rapid spin on hazards. So it's a really good playstyle and something I would suggest pretty heavily to new players coming into the format due to ease of access for it. Yeah. That is all I wanted to talk about today. This has been Alex, and hope you enjoyed the good educational video. I will call it the bye. See you guys next time. Bye bye.